Imagine a guy in Amsterdam saying with pride, "I'm a real Dutchman. My blood is different." He sees himself in the mirror, tall, light-skinned, maybe blonde, rides a bike, eats cheese, swears about the rain, supports his football club. Everything in his life screams Netherlands. His DNA does not care. If you zoom into his genome and strip away the flag, the language, the passport, you hit a brutal, beautiful truth. He's about 99.9% genetically identical to almost every other human on the planet. Dutch, Moroccan, Indonesian, Nigerian, Ukrainian, Brazilian, Japanese. The difference between all of them fits into roughly 0.1% of their DNA. That tiny fraction decides a few details: skin tone, some facial features, how well he digests milk, a bit of disease risk, how his liver handles alcohol. That's it. The rest of his code, the vast majority, is the same human operating system running in every one of us. And when you rewind his DNA far enough back in time, past the canals and windmills, past medieval cities and Roman forts, past mammoths and ice, it doesn't lead to some mythical pure Dutch ancestor. It leads to the same place as everyone else. A small population of modern humans in Africa. Call that ultimate source evolution. Call it a creator who chose to work through evolution. Genetics is neutral to the name. What it shows, again and again, is one simple pattern. Every living person is a twig on the same tree. The Dutchman on his bike, and a woman in Lagos, a child in Tokyo, and a farmer in Peru. They are all distant cousins. Our species is young. It spent most of its early life in Africa. At some point, a relatively small group left that continent and spread out over the rest of the world. On their way, they picked up a few useful genetic tweaks from other human types, like Neanderthals, but the core code stayed the same. Every European, every Asian, every person from the Americas or Australia is ultimately descended from that same wandering group. There is no separate European model of human built from scratch. There is only one line branching again and again. Now keep that global picture in your head and zoom in on one small, flat corner of Europe, the river deltas where the Rhine, Meuse, and Scheldt meet the sea. Today we call it Nederland, the Low Countries. For most of human history, nobody did. 20,000 years ago, during the coldest bite of the last ice age, this region is not cozy countryside with cows and bikes. Much of northern Europe is a frozen semi-desert. Thick ice sheets cover the north. South of the ice, bitter winds whip across dry plains. Trees are rare. Reindeer, horses, and mammoths move in herds across hard ground. Behind them, small bands of humans follow, setting up temporary camps, then moving on. These people are not Dutch or German. They have no map of Europe, no notion of nations. They are just groups of Homo sapiens, the same species as us, trying not to die. Their clothes are animal skins. Their tools are stone, bone, and wood. Their world might be a few hundred kilometers wide, and even that is enormous for them. As the climate slowly warms, ice retreats northwards. The North Sea basin, which had been mostly dry land, begins to flood. Low river valleys drown. A huge landscape that once connected Britain to mainland Europe disappears under rising water. On slightly higher ground, in the area that will one day be the Netherlands and Belgium, new environments appear. Wetlands full of birds and fish, young forests, shifting dunes, muddy tidal flats. Hunters and gatherers adapt. Some follow the reindeer north. Others stay among the rivers and coasts, becoming experts in fish, shellfish, waterfowl, and forest game. They travel by simple boats along creeks and estuaries, camp on sandy ridges, leave behind flint tools, hearths, bones, and microscopic fragments of themselves in teeth and bone. If you met one of them, you wouldn't think, ah, typical Dutchman. His skin might be darker than yours. His clothes torn from animals he killed himself. His language a string of sounds with no connection to Dutch or German or English. But inside his cells, the same story is already written. African origin, a sprinkle of Neanderthal, the standard human toolkit of genes for brain, bone, blood, and immune system. The land under his feet is low, but it is not yet Netherlands. It's just one more frontier where our species is testing what it can survive. Then, far to the southeast, another revolution begins. Quiet at first, then unstoppable. In the hills and plains of what is now Turkey in the Near East, some groups of humans make a strange decision. They stop chasing animals and start growing plants. Wheat and barley instead of random grasses, herds of goats and sheep instead of wild herds you might or might not find. They settle down, villages appear, fields appear, graves appear, that never have to be abandoned because the group isn't moving on. The descendants of these first farmers push outward, not in a single heroic march, but slowly, in family-sized steps. A village sends a few young couples to start a new settlement in the next valley. Their children push further. Over many generations, this lifestyle spreads into the Balkans, Central Europe, up the river systems. Some of those families, or their grandchildren, or their great-grandchildren, eventually reach the damp, flat edges of northwestern Europe. They arrive with seeds, animals, pottery, polished stone axes, and a different understanding of land. To the local hunter-gatherers, these people must look like an alien tribe. They clear trees instead of following them. They put up permanent houses. They mark territory and ancestors with fixed graves and monuments. They also bring different DNA. Their ancestry traces back to those early farming communities of the Eastern Mediterranean. When they settle in what will one day be the Netherlands, they don't completely erase the old hunter groups, but the maths is on their side. Farming supports more children in a smaller area. More children means more grandchildren. Over time, their lineages become a bigger and bigger share of the population. The people living in the Low Countries, a few thousand years after farming arrives, already carry a layered mix inside them. Older Ice Age hunter genes, newer farmer genes. Different waves, same human root. Later, yet another wave will ripple through Europe. People from the wide grasslands of the steppe, with wagons, horses, and metal, whose descendants will help shape Germanic, Slavic, and Celtic peoples. Their genetic signal will also flow into the ancestors of the Dutch. More layers, more mixing, same tree. This is the key point. There is no magical Dutch gene that drops from the sky. The people we now call Dutch are simply one local variation of a continental pattern. Hunter, farmer, herder ancestries braided together. And that continental pattern is just one branch of a single human family that started long before anyone built a dike, planted a tulip, or painted a canal. In the next part, we'll move forward in time. Romans at the Rhine, Franks and Frisians, medieval traders and sea captains, a small low country turning into a global power, and how all of that history left marks in the DNA of the people now calling themselves Nederlanders. Let's walk forward in time. The ice is gone, the forests are thick, the hunter-farmer mix has settled into something like stability. On the sandy ridges and along the riverbanks of what will become the Netherlands, people live in small communities. They clear fields, graze cattle, worship local gods tied to groves, springs, and strange stones. They trade a little, fight a little, marry a lot. They don't call themselves Dutch. They're just the people from here. Then, from the south, an empire arrives. The Romans at the water's edge. For Rome, this northern corner of Europe is not the center of anything. It's a wet, awkward frontier at the edge of the known world, where marshes, rivers, and sea all mix. Legions march north and establish a frontier along the Rhine. To the south of the river, they build roads, forts, and towns. To the north, beyond the main line of the Roman army, live tribes that the empire never fully swallows. Frisians, Chauci, others whose names survive only in fragments. The people Rome writes about in this region are often described as tall, tough, and stubborn, living among tidal flats and salt marshes, good with boats and cattle, not easily impressed by foreign officials. If you stood on the riverbank in the 1st century, you'd see a strange mix. legionaries from Italy and other parts of the empire. Local river, people who trade with them, supply them, sometimes fight them. Merchants moving along the new Roman roads, bringing wine, pottery, glass beads. Genetically, Rome does what it always does. It sprinkles a bit of diversity on top of a local base. A few soldiers settle down, marry local women, and have children who carry both Mediterranean and Northern European ancestry. A few merchants stay. A few slaves are brought in from far away. But the empire in this region is thin and fragile. Swamps, floods, and rebellions keep it from sinking very deep into the land. When Rome weakens and pulls back, it doesn't drag the whole population with it. Most of the people in the Low Countries remain where they always were, with slightly new tools, sometimes a new god or two, but largely the same genetic mixture as before. The empire falls apart. The DNA barely shrugs. Frisians and Franks, cousins arguing over a wet backyard. After Rome, new labels start to appear. In the north, along the coasts and tidal flats, live people that later sources call Frisians. They are seafaring, cattle-keeping, stubbornly independent. Their descendants will still be speaking a close cousin of English and Dutch many centuries later. Further south and inland on heavier soils, another group rises, the Franks. This is not one fixed tribe, but a cluster of Germanic-speaking groups who become very good at two things: fighting and reinventing themselves. They expand, absorb neighbors, and eventually build one of the early medieval super kingdoms of Western Europe. Under leaders like Clovis and, later, Charlemagne, the Frankish world stretches from northern Spain to central Germany. The lands that will become the southern Netherlands and Belgium sit right in the middle of this new power web. What does this mean for the people living there? No sudden swap of populations. Instead, a slow shift of elites, language, and loyalty. Local leaders tie themselves to Frankish kings. Christianity spreads with royal backing. Churches, monasteries, missionaries. Latin words seep into speech. Law codes are written down. Over time, regional dialects and identities grow under this Frankish umbrella. The coast and the north, where Frisians are strongest, resist longer. Their world is more oriented to the North Sea, trade, fishing, sometimes piracy. They look to the horizon more than to the royal court inland. If you could take a genetic snapshot of the Low Countries at this time, you'd see something very familiar. People in the south and along major rivers look a lot like other early medieval Northwest Europeans, a blend of ancient hunter, early farmer, and steppe ancestry, now filtered through this Frankish political world. People in the north and on the islands show more continuity with older coastal groups, what we loosely call Frisian, still part of the same big European pattern, but with their own accent. Already, a basic north-south difference is forming that modern genetic studies can still detect in Dutch people today. Not a wall, not separate races, just a soft gradient, a memory of slightly different histories layered onto the same human base. Water as enemy and ally. There is something else quietly shaping the ancestors of the Dutch that has nothing to do with DNA letters and everything to do with where those letters are forced to live. Water. The Low Countries are called low for a reason. Much of the land is at or below sea level, or at constant risk of flooding from rivers and storm surges. For early communities, this is both curse and opportunity. Floodplains are fertile, but dangerous. Salt marshes and tidal flats are rich in fish and grazing, but can vanish under a spring tide. Peat bogs provide fuel, but digging them lowers the ground and invites the sea. Generation after generation, people in this region learn the same hard lesson. If you want to stay here, you either work with water or you get washed away. They start simple. Small, raised dwelling mounds, primitive dikes, drainage ditches. Over time, they get bolder. They embank entire stretches of river. They build more sophisticated dike systems. They reclaim land from marshes and lakes. This isn't just engineering, it's culture. It teaches cooperation, planning, long-term thinking. If the dike breaks, it doesn't matter if your neighbor is Frisian, Frankish, rich, poor, kind, or an idiot. You are all suddenly underwater together. You can feel that mentality echo today in cliches about Dutch society. Direct, organized, allergic to chaos when it comes to things that affect everyone. It's not something in their blood. It's a survival strategy carved into behavior by geography. Towns, trade, and a new kind of identity. As centuries pass, the region we now call the Netherlands begins to fill with something that will make its people globally famous later. Towns that live on trade. Sitting at the mouths of big rivers is a superpower in the age before railways and highways. Goods moving between inland Europe and the sea have to pass through you. Grain, timber, wool, cloth, wine, salt, later spices, and silk. Everything flows along your channels. Medieval towns like Utrecht, Deventer, later Bruges, Ghent, and eventually Amsterdam grow fat on tolls and markets. They join trading networks like the Hanseatic League. They attract merchants and artisans from all over. Germans, Scandinavians, people from the Baltic, from England, from further south. Each individual migrant is just one person, one family. But over centuries, they add yet another thin layer of mixing to the local gene pool. Again, nothing earth-shattering. A German cloth merchant marrying a local woman. A Scandinavian sailor staying after an injury. A Flemish craftsman moving north after a war. All small, all additive. The people in these towns still see themselves primarily as locals. Citizens of this city, subjects of that count or duke. Nederlander is not yet a word with much political weight, but the ingredients are slowly simmering. Flat, flood-prone land that forces cooperation, river mouths that make trade profitable, a location wedged between big powers France, German lands, later Spain, that encourages a wary, sharp mentality. From these ingredients, something recognizably Dutch will eventually cook itself, but it will take a few more shocks. Is there such a thing as a Dutch body? Let's jump out of the timeline for a moment and look at a stereotype. When people picture the Dutch, one of the cliches that shows up is tall. Statistically, they're among the tallest populations in the world today, especially men. Cows, milk, cheese, good healthcare, and social factors all play a role. There's also evidence that in this region, people who were slightly taller tended to have more children over recent generations. So their height-related genes got a small boost. Does that mean there is a tall Dutch gene that appears nowhere else? No. Height is influenced by many genes, each adding a tiny bit plus nutrition and health. The variants that contribute to tallness in the Netherlands are not unique to the Netherlands. They exist all over Europe and beyond. They just happen to be selected a bit more strongly here in recent centuries. The same is true for other patterns. Many Dutch people are lactose tolerant as adults. They can digest milk without trouble. That trait is common across much of Northern Europe, not just here. Certain disease risks are slightly more or less common than in neighboring regions, but almost never absolutely unique. Hair and eye colors follow familiar Northwest European patterns, a spread from dark to blonde, brown to blue or gray, nothing alien. If you line up Dutch genomes next to German, Belgian, Northern French, and British genomes, they blend into each other. You can, with enough data, see clusters and regional structure. Someone with all grandparents from Groningen will look a bit different genetically from someone whose grandparents are all from Limburg. But there is no sharp cliff where Dutch DNA suddenly begins and German DNA stops. What you see instead is exactly what you'd expect from one shared origin and a lot of local history. A continuous gradient, lightly sculpted by rivers, borders, wars, and marriage habits. From patchwork to the Netherlands. Politically, the land that will become the Netherlands is, for most of the Middle Ages, a messy patchwork of counties, bishoprics, and duchies. Holland, Zeeland, Utrecht, Gelre, Brabant, and more. They owe fealty up the chain to larger powers. First to the Holy Roman Empire, later through dynastic marriages and inheritance to the Burgundian and Habsburg houses. From the DNA point of view, this is all theater. Flags change, titles change. The underlying population changes slowly through local births and occasional newcomers. Then something important happens in the 16th century. The people in this low, wet, compact region get collectively fed up with being ruled from distant, more powerful centers. The revolt against Spanish Habsburg rule, the 80 Years' War, is not just a religious or political conflict. It's the moment when a new identity starts to crystallize. We are not just Holland, Zeeland, Utrecht. We are together. We are the Republic of the Seven United Netherlands. They share enemies. They share dikes and rivers. They share a new, dangerous idea that a bunch of provinces can govern themselves with no king at their top. This is when the words Diets and Nederlands start to gain modern meaning. The language spoken here begins to be standardized, printed, exported. Merchants, ship captains, soldiers, painters, philosophers, all carrying this flavor of Germanic speech, start to show up in foreign diaries as Dutch. Genetically though, they are still the same layered mix. Descendants of hunter-gatherers who watched the sea rise, descendants of farmers whose ancestors walked from the Near East, descendants of steppe herders whose genes seeped in through Frankish and other Germanic lines, sprinkled with traces of Romans, Frisians, Vikings, Germans, Flemings, and others who moved in over centuries. Your DNA does not get a shock when the Republic is declared. It does not stand up and sing a new anthem. It just keeps doing what it always has, copying itself with tiny errors from parent to child, generation after generation. The Low Countries go global. Now comes the part of Dutch history that school books and paintings love, the so-called Golden Age. Ships from this small republic fan out across the world. They appear on coasts in Africa, Asia, and the Americas. They build forts and trading posts, found colonies, transport spices, textiles, coffee, sugar, and horrifically, hundreds of thousands of enslaved people. For the story of Dutch DNA, this era matters in two opposite ways. Outward. A stream of people leaves the Low Countries: sailors, soldiers, merchants, administrators, settlers. Some never come back. Their genes get absorbed into local populations far from home. South Africa, Indonesia, the Caribbean, North and South America. Inward. Port cities like Amsterdam and Rotterdam become even more international. Sailors and traders from many lands pass through. Some stay permanently, marry locals, and add new threads of ancestry from Portugal, Germany, Scandinavia, the Mediterranean, maybe a few from further beyond Europe. The overall genetic profile of the Dutch stays firmly Northwest European. There is no massive inward migration yet that would dramatically overhaul the population structure. But the idea of we are a small people with ships everywhere becomes part of the national story, a psychological layer on top of the biological ones. At the same time, the basic pattern never changes. All of these people, the local farmer in Drenthe, the Amsterdam merchant, the sailor in Batavia, still share that 99.9% of human code with everyone else on the planet. They are arguing over who is really Dutch in a world where the basic blueprint under all their identities is almost identical. In the final part of this story, we'll jump into the modern age. Industrialization, 2 world wars, decolonization, post-war migration, Surinamese and Indonesian and Moroccan and Turkish and Polish families joining the story, and what it means in a 21st century Netherlands to say, we are different, when your DNA is quietly whispering, you are all variations of the same idea. By the time we enter the 19th and 20th centuries, the DNA inside people in the Netherlands is already layered like a geological cross-section. Ice Age hunters, early farmers, steppe herders, coastal Frisians, inland Franks, a little Roman, a little Viking, threads from medieval traders and soldiers. The code itself is old. What changes now is the way that code moves around. Steam, factories, railways, harbors. The Industrial Revolution turns the Netherlands into an even bigger mixer. People who once would have spent their whole lives in one village now move to cities for work. A farm boy from Brabant marries a girl whose family came from Groningen. A Frisian ends up in Rotterdam's docks. A Catholic from the south and a Protestant from the north share the same factory floor and eventually the same family tree. Inside the genome, this looks like what it is: shuffling. North-south differences get softer. Town and countryside get more mixed. But the overall recipe is still the same Northwest European blend you'd expect. A geneticist can still see fine regional structure if they look carefully. Yet nothing like a hard boundary between Dutch DNA and German DNA or Belgian DNA. Just gradients, just history. Then the world tears itself apart twice. In the First and Second World Wars, millions of people across Europe are killed, displaced, traumatized. The Netherlands suffers invasion, occupation, hunger. Yet even here, in the worst moments, DNA stays stubbornly simple. People fall in love in hiding, in shelters, in queues for bread. Children are conceived because two people, for whatever reason, met at exactly that impossible moment. War moves individuals around and cuts lines short, but it does not create a new type of human. It only resorts the same shared deck of cards. The bigger shift for Dutch DNA comes when the direction of movement changes again. For centuries, the Low Countries sent people outward to South Africa, Indonesia, the Caribbean, the Americas. Now, in the mid-20th century, people begin to move in. There are families returning from former colonies. Indo-European families from Indonesia, Surinamese families, people from the Caribbean islands. There are guest workers invited from Turkey, Morocco, Southern Europe to fill labor shortages. Later, there are migrants and refugees from all over: Eastern Europe, the Middle East, Africa, Asia. Some come to study, some to work, some to flee war or collapse at home. Some stay and raise children who speak Dutch as their first language and support Oranje like anybody else. On a classroom photo in a modern Dutch city, you can see this in faces. Different skin tones, hair textures, eye shapes, names from every corner of the map. On a genetic level, nothing mystical is happening. Those same 3 billion letters of DNA are being recombined again between people whose ancestors took different routes out of Africa thousands of years ago and then met again on this small, flat piece of land. A child with a Dutch mother and Moroccan father, or Surinamese father and Polish mother, is not less or more Dutch at the level of biology. Their genome is still human, still 99.9% identical to every other human. They simply carry a richer mix of that 0.1% variation that we like to label with flags. Their immune system draws on a slightly broader library of past battles. Their skin reacts to sunlight a little differently. Their family story spans more maps. That's all. When a DNA test today labels part of someone as Netherlands or Northwest European, it isn't detecting a special Dutch ingredient that appears nowhere else. It's recognizing a pattern that is common in people whose ancestors for many generations lived in this rainy, river-cut, dike-protected region before the most recent waves of migration. Everything on top of that, Indonesian, Surinamese, Turkish, Moroccan, Anatolian, Polish, whatever is also real, also human, also part of the story. So what actually makes someone Dutch? It's not a magic gene. It's the combination of a place, a history, and a set of habits and stories. Complaining about the weather, arguing in meetings, but then cooperating when the dike has to be fixed. Being direct in a way that feels rude to outsiders and honest to insiders. Biking in the rain because of course you do. Watching the national team and suddenly feeling something pull in your chest when the anthem plays, even if your grandparents were born far away. Two neighbors can share almost identical DNA and feel nothing in common. Two other people can be genetically more distant yet feel deeply connected through language, humor, childhood memories. Biology gives you a body. Culture gives you a home. And under all of it, deeper than any national story, sits that simple scientific fact. Humans are one species with one origin. The tiny genetic differences we obsess over are like small variations in handwriting. The message is the same. Some people call that one origin evolution, shaped by chance and time. Others call it the signature of one creator who used evolution as a tool. Whichever language you prefer, the conclusion is identical. There is no biological basis for declaring one group truly human and another group somehow less. So when someone says, real Dutch blood is different, you now know how to answer. You can say, your ancestors walked through ice and forest and mud to get here, just like everyone else's. They mixed with hunters, farmers, riders, sailors, traders, just like everyone else's. Their DNA is one tiny variation of the same code that runs in all 8 billion of us. You can love your flag, defend your language, argue about your politics, feel proud of your small, crowded country between river and sea. That's normal. That's human. Just remember, when you look at your DNA results, or at a stranger on your street, or at a refugee stepping off a bus in your town, the differences between you are measured in fractions of a percent. The story behind you both goes all the way back to the same small band of humans, somewhere in Africa, looking up at a night sky and having no idea that one day their children would argue over who truly belongs to a place called the Netherlands.